Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Becky Vorwinda, the Executive Director of the Fellowship. It's wonderful to see a lot of faces of parents of alumni from across a wide range of years. And it's just so nice to be together, both to mark the start of the Hebrew month of Kislev. We're now 2 weeks since the presidential election, and to just take a moment to reflect together, to connect. We're so grateful to Rabbi Sharon for joining us to offer some words of Torah and a point of reflection. And then after we hear from Rabbi Sharon, we'll have a chance to also break out into some small groups with some questions that you can use to deepen a conversation, get to know other Bronfmanim who are on this call and reflect about where you're at in this moment and what you can be hopeful about and what you can commit yourself to as we move forward. I was looking earlier today, and a study that was done in 2019 by the Public Religion Research Institute said that 91% of Americans feel that we are polarized, probably both a really sad number to see, but also maybe not a surprising number to see. And the Bronfman Fellowship is a program that believes at its core in trust and relationships and the importance of continually going back to building those ties, building those relationships towards a shared good, towards a shared community, and then extending that beyond our own community into the places in which we live and to this country. Obviously, we also have Canadian and Israeli alumni. I don't want to leave them out, though I'm not sure how many are on this call. But it's really so special to continue to do that work, not only with our fellows, but also with our alumni community. So thank you for making the time today, and I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Sharon to bring us in.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. Wow. I have to say, it's, I told Becky when I saw the list of people who had signed up, I mostly, just want to hang out and schmooze with all of you. It's amazing to see you. The fish-offs are very well represented. I want a little shout out. But just really great to see everybody. So, Erin, I'm thinking maybe since we just had that beautiful song, we can hold off on the other one. Maybe we'll close with it, and I'll jump in. And is there a way to, I want to keep myself on gallery view so I can see all of you. Oh gosh, so when Becky called, I don't know, a few weeks ago, it was on the other side of the election and asked if I might be willing to share some thoughts. It was, of course, like, sure, there's no community I would rather sort of be in conversation with in this time. And, where will we be and what will there be to say? And I still feel a little bit that way, but I wanted to share some reflections, which are, I am, probably like all of you, trying very much still in a place of trying to metabolize what's going on. And so the reflections I wanted to share are really reflections of how I am thinking about this and trying to understand what's happening in my own relationship to it. And so it's going to be very much through the only lens that I really know and feel is natural to me, which is kind of a lens of that is my best attempt at being human and humanizing other people, and sort of a spiritual lens and a lens of Torah. I feel, just given the very moment that we're in, that I can't not say that it feels very clear just how vital a peaceful transition of power is now, and the safeguarding of our democratic institutions and processes. But I don't feel that I have a lot to personally add to that conversation. So, so what's what's weighing on me, I think one of the things weighing on me most is the awareness that the relief that I am beginning to let myself feel now, this is just speaking, in terms of where I'm coming from, the relief that I'm beginning to feel now as it seems to be becoming clearer with every day that Biden and Harris will be our next president and vice president, that sense of relief is not shared by almost half our country, and may not be shared by everyone on this call I want to name, and I'm going to try to speak to that a little bit. But I just feel this very, and it's been with me very much in the last week, sort of the acute awareness that that the sense of displacement and distrust that I would be feeling now if things had gone the other way is what tens of millions of people in this country are feeling right now. And sort of, it's actually kind of a dizzying realization, dizzying thing to try to hold on to. And I can't even hold on to it all the time. But I wanted to offer basically three observations rooted in some Torah that I am holding close during this time. And three observations that are just feeling important and somewhat grounding to me now. And so I'll talk for a little while, maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes, something like that. And then I think we're going to go into breakout groups. Although if people have, I hope there's a little bit of time. If people have initial questions or responses that you want to share before we break out, I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions. So three observations. The first has to do with what I'm describing as human limitation and divine capaciousness. Okay, so let me just say a little bit about that. So one of my very favorite midrashim, it's from Shmot Rabbah, from Exodus Rabbah, and it actually shows up as a commentary on the moment that the Israelites are facing the sea in front of them, the Egyptian army behind them. And it's a midrashic reflection on what it means for God to be Shomea Tefillah, what it means for God to be the one who hears prayer. So I'll just read a few lines of the midrash. It says, in the hour that Israel prays, you do not find that everyone prays as one, but rather each and every community prays in its own way and time. This congregation first, and after that another congregation. And after all the congregations have finished all of their prayers, the angel appointed over all prayers gathers up all of the prayers that all of the congregations have prayed, makes out of them a crown, and places that crown of sort of human longing and praise upon the head of the Holy Blessed One. And then it says, quickly, davar acher, another interpretation, and this is the really critical part, a human being can't hear a conversation of two people speaking at the same time. But the Holy Blessed One is not like that. Everyone is praying at the same time, and God can hear and receive all of those prayers. So the way I hear this, and I would extend, all Israel to all people here, let's, just expand the bounds of the Midrash a little bit. And I would extend, that we're not just talking about prayer here, but all expressions of, the expressions of the human heart. It seems to me that part of what the Midrash is telling us, we are limited in our capacity to hold diverse perspectives and experiences and voices. That's just the way it is. We are limited. But at the same time, we're somehow asked to consider the possibility that there is one who is able to hold it all, and that we are all held in that divine embrace, as we are crying out each in our own way, or singing out each in our own way. So this, I just want to say, we talk a lot about celebrating diversity, right? In places like Bronfman, and where I am now, Hebrew College, and Hillel, where I worked for so many years. And we talk about celebrating diversity. I use that language all the time. But I also want to name, honestly, that sometimes diversity really hurts. Sometimes it is really painful to try to hold the different perspectives and voices that we're trying to hold. And okay, so that's observation number one, is about human limitation and divine capaciousness, right? In the image of the Midrash, that we're recognizing the limits of our capacity to hold, two voices speaking at once, or multiple perspectives at once. And at the same time, sort of imagining, honoring the divine capacity to do that. The second observation flows out of this week's Torah portion, which is Parashat Toldot. And my heading for this second observation is about the danger of banishing people. And so let me just take you through a little bit of where I'm seeing this and feeling this in the context of this week's Torah portion. We're in sort of the transition from the focus on Abraham to the focus on Isaac. 2 weeks ago, we read the story of the binding of Isaac. Last week was Parshat Chayei Sarah, when Sarah dies, and Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. Isaac and Rebecca meet and fall in love, and then this week is the beginning of the story of the birth of Jacob and Esau, and that sort of continues. One of the verses, okay, so but our theme here is the danger of banishing people. So one of the verses that troubles the commentators in this week's Torah portion is towards the beginning of the portion, when we are told that Isaac loved Esau and Rebecca loved Jacob. It's not bashful about telling us these. There's, very clear preferential, people like to say, we like to say we don't love any of our children, but anyway, they're clear about it. So Isaac loved Esau, Rebecca loved Jacob. So this I offer a little bit, it's inspired by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who people know passed away just recently, so Zichrono Livracha in his memory. So he talks about, to understand Isaac's love for Esau, we have to read it through the prism of the Akedah. We have to read it through the prism of the binding of Isaac. And here's the thing. If at the end of the binding of Isaac 2 weeks ago, Isaac disappears. In the immediate aftermath of the binding of Isaac, we hear nothing about Isaac for a couple of chapters. There is really quite a stunning silence. And there are actually, Sachs talks about, there are 3 silences that are kind of breathtaking after the trauma of being taken up to the top of Mount Moriah and almost offered as a sacrifice by his father. So the first silence is that at the very end of the story of the binding of Isaac, we read that Abraham came down with his servants from the mountain, and we don't hear anything about Isaac. We don't know where he is. The second silence is right after that. At the beginning of the next parsha, we read that Sarah dies, and that Abraham comes to mourn for her. Where's Isaac? His mother has just died. We don't hear anything about Abraham and Isaac mourning together. Second silence in this moment of loss. Where's Isaac? And then the third silence is also in last week's portion, when Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. Where's Isaac? We have no idea. We don't hear anything. We have no idea if Isaac even knows that that Abraham has sent the servant to find a wife for him, right? So silence upon silence upon silence after the trauma of the Akedah. When Isaac reappears for the first time after all that silence in last week's Torah portion, we're told he's walking in the field, and he and Rebecca see each other. Rebecca falls off her camel, etc. But we are given a hint finally. We're told where Isaac is coming from. Right, so he's been gone. He's gone missing after the Akedah, and then very, subtly, just the text mentions where he's coming from, which is a place called Be'er Lachai Ro'i, which literally means the well of the living one, the well of the living God who sees me. And Be'er Lachai Ro'i is it's Hagar's place. It's the well that Hagar names when she is in flight from Sarah and Abraham, many chapters earlier. And we understand that it's where Hagar and Ishmael settle. So after what has happened in the binding of Isaac and after the disappearance of Isaac, we're given this hint that where did Isaac go after that experience? Where did Isaac go after the Akedah? He went to find Hagar and Ishmael. So how does this all connect? So it's a very, to me, really, really poignant. And there's a whole bunch of midrashim, which we won't go into about, but that's where he goes after this experience. So Rabbi Jonathan Sacks connects this in a really beautiful way, I think, to Isaac's love for Esau. And this is what he says: how do we understand the fact that Isaac loved Esau, who after all is not the one, he's not going to carry the covenantal line. And so this is what he says. If those silences mean something after the Akedah, they suggest that even an arrested sacrifice still has a victim. And then he goes on to say this: if this is so, then Isaac's love for Esau is simply explained. It is as if Isaac had said, I know what Esau is. He is strong, wild, unpredictable, possibly violent. It is impossible that he should be the person entrusted with the covenant and its spiritual demands. But this is my child. I refuse to sacrifice him as my father sacrificed me, as my father almost sacrificed me. I refuse to send him away as my parents sent Hagar and Ishmael away. My love for my son is unconditional. I do not ignore who or what he is, but I will love him anyway. And he goes on to say, I will bless him, I will hold him close. And then he says, in this one act of loving Esau, Isaac redeemed the pain of two of the most difficult moments in his father Abraham's life, the sending away of Hagar and Ishmael and the binding of Isaac. I believe that love helps heal both the lover and the loved. Okay, so that's the second, is the danger of banishing people, that there's a very, very strong message, I think, in this parsha and in the healing that Isaac brings through his love for Esau, which has to do with a refusal to banish. Finally, another danger, the danger of ideological purity, or what one might call zealotry. And this brings us to Kislev. We're on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the beginning of the month of Kislev, and approaching Hanukkah, and thinking about what it has to say for us, for our own time. So on one level, the symbolism of Hanukkah is very primal and primary, and Becky, I think you even included it in the name, is something like bringing more light, right? So, you know, it's light in the dead of winter, and it's victory when it had seemed improbable, if not impossible, and it's more than enough when there had been too little, more than enough oil when there had been too little. It's the few against the many. It's the freedom to be. All of these things, you know, it's kind of irresistible, irreducible values. And then, except that as you start to dig into the Hanukkah story, it just keeps getting more and more and more complicated, kind of endlessly complicated. So, you know, the heroes of the story, it turns out the Maccabees were Hasmoneans who were actually religious zealots. Like, we're kind of on the wrong side of this story. You know, they were religious zealots who killed Jews who were willing to Hellenize during that period. And then that's already complicated enough for those of us who aren't so comfortable with religious zealotry. But then to complicate matters further, the Hasmoneans themselves later became Hellenized, right? You know, after our story. And in fact, during later periods of history, not that much later, but, you know, later on, they actually became opponents of the rabbis and even persecuted the rabbis. And it's also worth noting that the independence of the Hasmoneans only lasted about 100 years, less than 100 years. So, so layers and layers of complexity to what starts as kind of this, you know, simple symbolic story. And probably for all these reasons and more, the Talmud actually has very little to say about Hanukkah. The Mishnah has nothing. The Talmud has very little, other than the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days. And it actually shows up only in a discussion about Shabbat candles when the rabbis, it's almost like parenthetical. The rabbis say, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah anyway? And so the interesting thing, though, is that the ambiguous history of the holiday is preserved in small ways in other places, like in the Al HaNisim prayer that we add to the Amidah, or that we add to Birkat Hamazon, to the grace after the meal. So, and of course, it's, you know, Hanukkah serves different purposes and means different things in different times and places and periods of Jewish history. So all of which is fairly ironic when you think about it, because the holiday that begins in religious zealotry becomes a holiday of tremendous spiritual ambiguity. At the same time, the ambiguity of it is preserved. So I think just as we're implicitly warned about the danger of banishing human beings, of banishing people, we're also warned against banishing ideas and moments that are part of our history and part of our past, as complicated as they might be. So all of which brings me back to our limitations and our inability to hold it all, and the fact that we're asked simultaneously, while acknowledging that, to stretch and to try to make our own hearts more capacious, to make more room for the experiences and voices of others, to imagine that we may have more in common than we fear, and to consider the possibility that there is one who holds us all. So I wanted to close actually by sharing a prayer that I offered in our community on the day after the election, and it is a prayer to the one who holds us all. I'll close with that. Elohei Ruchot L'chol Basar, God of the spirits of all flesh, we spend so much time saying no to a long list of isms, saying no to the foot on the neck, the hand in the pocket, the cage at the border, the torch in the hand, the hate on the tongue, the cold in the eyes, saying no to the degradation of language, of land, of law, of life. Ava Rachamim, Father of all fathers, Mother of all mothers, Source of all compassion, help us stand before you and say yes. Yes to the sanctity, to the preciousness, to the dignity of all life created in your image. Yes to the truth of your oneness and ours. Yes to the breathtaking beauty of our world, and yes to the vital moral fabric of our lives. To the forces that would tear that fabric apart, we say we will always show up to stitch it back together. We walk in the footsteps of our ancestor Abraham, who stitched together all who inhabit this world, she'icha et kol ba'ei ha'olam, who saw connection everywhere, who was commanded to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. We know that it is so much easier and faster to tear things apart than it is to stitch them together. But we will keep showing up for as long as it takes, because we are children ourselves, because we are parents, because we are teachers, because we are witnesses, because we are weavers, because we are threads in the tapestry of your creation. We will stitch together what has been torn apart. Please give us strength, give us wisdom, give us courage. Gather us all in the embrace of your unending love. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, you who wrestle, and bear witness to the one who holds us all. Amen.